All right, good morning. Hope you've had a good spring break. How many people didn't realize it was spring break last week? Okay, you didn't have a good spring break, but no, it's good to have everybody back and everybody starting to come back into town. We're looking at the story of Daniel and Daniel's life, and just to kind of set you up for where we are, this is later in Daniel's life. And if you know the story, Daniel was taken from Jerusalem when Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon conquered Jerusalem and conquered the southern part of Israel, and they took him off because Daniel was one of the youths who was part of the ruling class, the educated, the stronger, whatever of Jerusalem. They took the very best and they took him off to Babylon. As teenagers, he would have been about 15 years old. So he serves Nebuchadnezzar with his life. And one of the things that we talked about from the very beginning is that Daniel had a foundation in his life. It was built into him. And here's what I want you to catch too about Daniel, because this is one of those things that sometimes we just think, so what are you saying? Daniel's just such an extraordinary person that God used him. Well, yes, but here's the way it really works. Daniel, God uses him, and God sustains Daniel, and he makes Daniel an extraordinary person. Because it says that there was this extraordinary spirit about Daniel. That doesn't mean he was born with it or it was a part of his genetics. It meant that God had built this into him. And there's something about Daniel's life that if you take an honest look at it, it's a really great story, you might see your life differently. Daniel is carted off. He loses everything that gives him significance, that makes him important. Like I said, he was a part of a very important class of people in Jerusalem. This was his strength. This place, the Jewish community, he's taken away from all of that. And Daniel only has one thing to hold on to, a few friends, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, a few others that came with him, and they kind of stand out with him. But he has one thing to hold on to. You know what that was? His relationship to God, the thing that he'd been taught. Now, I know that you think, or you might think, listen, everything's been taken away from me. God, how could you do this? God, how could you allow all of this to happen? Where are you? But the opposite is true. God often isolates us. God often takes us into a place that we never thought we would be. We never ever thought God would do that, because this is what we hear people saying. God has blessed me so much. Look at how much money I have. Look at how big my house is, big my car. Oh, God has blessed me. Look, I won everything. Look, oh, God has blessed me. I'm prettier than everybody else. For guys, it doesn't work that. But, we think that way. And sometimes what happens is God takes us to a place where we're by ourselves. We're isolated. We are alone. We have nothing else to grab hold of, hold on to, trust in, and believe in, but who? Is that a bad thing? It's an incredible thing. This is how God shapes Daniel's life. This is how he builds into him this extraordinary spirit. He shapes Daniel through these difficult things. It ends up that Daniel serves Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 43 years, so Daniel served him for maybe 40 years, something like that, faithfully, because that's all that he had to hold on to, and it's a part of the shaping of his character. And Daniel becomes an extraordinary person. I don't think as a 15-year-old, Daniel had all of these things. I think God shaped Daniel through these things. I can tell you from my own experience, I became a Christian. I was raised in a Christian home, raised in church, but it was in my teenage years. I was about 16 years old when I really realized who Jesus was, and that's who I wanted to follow with the rest of my life. Then one of the things that happened is I go off to college. And I go off to college. My brother drives because we only had one car, and so I ride with my brother, and he has to get there a week early. And I'm at a university, big university, the capital city of the state, and I'm sitting there by myself for a week because my brother has other things to do. I don't know anybody, and at first it was incredibly lonely. And at the same time, it was incredibly energizing by the end of the week because I had nothing to do except to get to know God, and I had a guitar, and I learned to play the guitar. It's a Sears Silvertone guitar. You didn't even know Sears made guitars, did you? I know I told somebody one time, I said, I had a Sears guitar. He said, oh, well, Lady Kenmore. I said, no, I know, but it was close. You know, it was one of the worst guitars, ever made. But if you can play on a really, really, really bad guitar, you can learn to play guitar. Life is like that. If you can learn through really, really difficult situations, and if you can find that God is real in the midst of those because you turn to Him and you look to Him and you have no one else to hold on to, guess what will be your strength? Yeah, something that you could never have had if everything had gone your way. Because you would have been absorbed with all of those things that now went your way. Does that give you a different perspective in life? It should. Because sometimes what we think is God forsaking us is actually the opposite. Is God getting a hold of us. It's God loving us. It's God caring for us. It's God building a strength into our lives that we could have never had anywhere else. And you can go Old Testament and New Testament. Daniel's story is not unique. You'll find the same story over and over and over and over again in people's lives that God uses this way. So here's the question I put in the top of your outline, because it was still the question as far as his enemies were concerned by the time we get to chapter number 6. And this is Daniel's in his 80s. There's a new king. There's a new kingdom. The Medo-Persian Empire, they've conquered Babylon. Darius is now over the Babylon region and all around it. And he appoints Daniel to serve him because he's heard about this guy. He's been kind of put on hold for 20 years during some other king turnovers. And so he puts him in charge. And if you've read the first part of chapter 6, he has 120 kind of governors or people that rule and 3 over them. And Daniel's one of the 3. And this is what it says. It says that Darius decided, you know what? I think I'll make Daniel the head of everybody. I think I'll let him run everything because he's just that good. He's just that reliable. He's just that faithful. If I was looking for someone that I could count on who would not rob me, he would not, try to have me assassinated. He is smart and powerful as he is absolutely loyal and trustworthy. It would be Daniel. I think I'll put him over everything. It's the same story when you read Joseph's story that the Pharaoh does with Joseph. He said, I need somebody that can run all of this for me, that I can trust, that absolutely will be faithful to me, and here's the thing, all of the guys that work for me, I don't trust any of them, right? So I'll take this guy who is not Egyptian and I'll put him over this. It's the same thing. I'll take this guy who's not Babylonian, I'll put him over it because he has proven himself. He's 80-something years old, but he has absolutely proven himself that he is faithful. I'll put him over everything. And everyone else becomes jealous. And they want Daniel to go down. And if the first part of the chapter, this is 2 weeks ago, we talked about it. They said, listen, we can't find any reason to take him down, to go before the king and accuse him because he does everything he's supposed to do. He's competent. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't go in and take his position and take advantage of his position. What are we going to do? How are we going to take this Daniel down? Because we want his position. We don't like the fact that the king has put him in charge. Do you see why the king didn't put them in charge? Yeah, of course, because that's exactly how they thought. And most of us sitting there thinking, well, I'm not sure. I wouldn't have thought that way. Sure. But something different has been built into Daniel's life. A trust has been built into Daniel's life. Daniel looks for his own sense of his significance, who he is. His trust is in God, not in now Darius, or not now in the Medo-Persian Empire. That's where he lives, that's where he works. But his trust is in God who has watched after him. So they say this. They said, we can't find anything to take him down except for one thing. He would never go against his God. So the only way we can take him down is through the law of his God. And that's where the story jumps in here. This is in verse number 6. And it says this. So the administrators and high officers, went to the king and said, long live King Darius. So, here they are proclaiming their loyalty to him. We are all in agreement. And they're speaking not only for themselves, but they're saying, listen, everybody who's anybody agrees with us on one thing. We administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so that it cannot be changed. An official law of the Medes and the Persians cannot be revoked. So Darius, he does what? He signs. Why do you think he signed the law? Hey, sounds good to me, right? Let's make you God of the month, King Darius. Is there anyone more deserving? And he's going like, well, now that you mention it, sounds like a really good thing to me. In fact, you guys who I don't trust to put in charge, I'm thinking more highly of you than I ever have before. There's an interesting word here. So in the very first, it says that they went to him, and I am putting this in the first part of your outline. King Darius is he's overwhelmed. He's overcome by the throng. You know what a throng is? No, it's not a bathing suit. Okay, I just, if you misspell it. You know what a throng is? A throng is a group of people who rush in, and they kind of overwhelm you. And the throng came to King Darius of all of his administrators and his rulers, and they come rushing in, and you got to make this decision quick. And the rush is a part of it. You can't hesitate. There's no time to wait or no time to waste, right? My dad taught me when we were young, as boys. He would always teach us this. When someone comes to you and say, here's the greatest deal ever in the world, you need to write us a check for everything you have. And if you miss this, you're going to miss out on a fortune, and you have to do it right this second. My dad always said, say, see ya. Because anybody that does that, what they want is for you not to have time to think, right? Just do it. Trust us. Especially, he said, when it's someone who comes in, you don't even know who they are. Of course they're setting you up. But they play to this idea that you have of, wow, I must be important. I must be special. In fact, this goes into number 2. Number 2, they use his own vanity against him. Have you ever had somebody use your own vanity against you? Sure you have. And it really makes you feel dumb afterwards, doesn't it? You think, man, I was so played. I cannot believe I fell into the trap of letting someone play me like that. I should have known better. But it's fast. It sounds like everybody's in agreement. How could you go wrong? This could never fail. Make yourself, Darius, the God of the month. Everyone bows down, is going to bow down and worship you. Man, what could be better? In fact, let me give you another word. For the fill in the blank was vanity, but let me be even more direct and maybe a little more painful in saying this. You know what vanity is? You know where vanity comes from? Vanity comes from neediness. And you say, you sound like you know. Oh yeah, takes one to know one, right? It comes from our neediness. We want to be recognized. We want to be acclaimed. We want someone to say, you are so important. You are so special. And the problem is, without God in our lives, without God being the one who affirms us and supports us, we spend so much time just looking around for things and people and all to say, my life is special. And some people are very skilled and very talented, just as needy. And through their skills and their talents, they attain and they get out and they think that will satisfy the neediness. Darius is just a perfect example. Here's the king of this part of the empire in Babylon. He rules and he falls for the trap. He falls for it. It's just so easy. Why? Because Darius is just like me and you. Darius is incredibly needy. If you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, you will see in the very first part of the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve, it's exactly what their struggle was. Because all of a sudden, everything that they needed was taken away. And everything that they needed was wrapped up in God. They had a place to live, perfect place to live. They had a job, wonderful job. I know a lot of people think that they didn't work. The opposite was true. They loved their job. They tended the garden. At the end of the day, they had the perfect relationship, the most in-depth, entertaining relationship possible. They walked with God in the evening, and let's go through the day, God. Any ladies here say, if my husband would only, right? I mean, let's just talk through the day. Let's just go through everything that happened. Let me listen to you. Let me affirm you. I mean, they had this incredible setup, and it was lost. And from that point on, men and women have struggled to find an answer for the neediness in their life. And they cannot find it. No one can find it outside of God, because there's nothing that can fill that need or that gap or that emptiness in your life but God. See, Daniel is a totally different person with an extraordinary spirit, with an incredible character, because Daniel has found something to fill him that everyone else didn't have. It's something to fill him that just amazed King Darius. Something to fill him that made it so that when he was in a position where he could take advantage, Daniel could profit incredibly. Daniel could take those who didn't like him, have them eliminated for no reason except the fact that he just didn't like them. Daniel doesn't do that. Why? Because Daniel doesn't have the same neediness. I mean, he did, but he found a solution for it. God had built it into him since he was 15 years old. And so Daniel's, at this point in his life, Daniel's like, well, I'm not going to abandon that now. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense to abandon what has filled my life since then at this point in my life. I put a verse in there because here's Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is talking to his disciples. He does wonderful things. He talks about how the eye is the lamp of the body. So in other words, how you see it, what you're looking for, has everything to do about whether or not you will be healthy inside or whether or not you will be ill inside and looking to fill that illness all the time, looking to fill that illness all the time. And here's that verse. This is Matthew chapter 6, beginning of verse 31. Here's what it says. In fact, you can read this with me. This is a great verse. Here's what Jesus says. Read it with me. So don't worry about, and he talked about all these things that you think are going to fill you up, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things, say this part with me, these things dominate the thoughts of who? Those who don't know God. They don't have what Daniel had. That's what dominates them. Of course it does. They're trying to meet their own need. They're trying to fill themselves up because they don't have a relationship to God to fill them up. And then it goes on to say, but your heavenly Father already knows all your what? In fact, it's proper. You could scratch that out and say, your heavenly Father already knows all your neediness. He does. He already knows all your neediness. And so then he goes on to say, seek the kingdom of God above all else. That means a relationship with God. And live righteously. And he will give you, here we go. He will give you what? Everything you what? Everything you neediness. That's right. Everything you neediness. He supplies all those things. That's not, if you think that means, and I see people do this all the time, they say, get a relationship to God, and then you get all the cars that you want. I mean, you've missed the whole point. Those things, again, will not fill the void that is there inside of you. He fills the void. And now everything you need, just like Daniel, he has given you. When Daniel was 15 years old and Daniel was brought over captive into Babylon, guess what? Daniel's neediness was already filled. When Daniel, at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign and he passes away and they go through all these kings and assassinations and all sorts of things that go on for about a little over 20 years, and Daniel's kind of taken out of the picture. It's a good thing, because it was a bloody place to sort of live and to work. Listen, in that time, Daniel understands my neediness is taken care of. I've told you before, I have 2 chihuahuas. And chihuahuas are incredibly needy, just to let you know. Anybody got chihuahuas, dogs? Yeah, they're little yappers and little barkers. And I told my wife I was going to use this story this morning. I set up a bird feeder. And here's the interesting thing about the chihuahuas in the backyard and birds. When big birds come and they come near the bird feeder and they go running out like little wild banshees, because they're offended that this bird is coming to their yard, right? Or a squirrel or anything like that. You know, the big birds fly off. This is the incredible thing that I noticed. They're these little bitty birds. I don't know if they're finches or what they are. They will come, and they're about this high off the ground, and they will come and they will sit on a branch or get near the bird feeder or whatever, and the wild banshees will come flying out of the house, yapping and barking, you know, as hard as they can, and they just sit there. They don't fly away. And I'm always kind of amazed by it, because here's my question. I don't know if you could answer this question. I said, I wonder if they are just smarter than the big birds and they know the chihuahuas can't get this high, or are they like Daniel as a 15-year-old? They just don't know any better, right? You wonder, which one is it, you know? But Daniel, in his just not knowing any better, he really had no choice when he's taken off. Daniel learns some things that the big birds, the more powerful ones, they never figure out. They never get it. They don't understand who God is and how faithful God is. Here, look at the next verse. This is in verse number 10. This is what it says. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed. So this is not something that's hidden from Daniel. He knows that King Darius has signed this law, and he can no longer pray, and he can no longer look to God according to the law for the next 30 days, because King Darius is now the king of the month. He says, here's what he does. Here he goes. He went home, and he knelt down as usual. When he hears about the law, when he learns this has been done, he goes home, and he kneels down as usual in his upstairs room. So this apparently was a place that Daniel would go, and they knew he would go there. And it had windows that I guess faced Jerusalem, and so whether they saw him or they just, more than likely, they just knew Daniel so much because they worked with him. They knew this is where Daniel goes, and he prays to his God. And he says, its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he'd always done. Catch this, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions? So here we go. Here, let me give you a couple of other fill-in-the-blanks on your back side of your eye. Daniel continues his relationship with God no matter what, because this is what Daniel knew. This is what Daniel understood. Daniel is not going to stop looking to God, who meets his needs and who has always watched after him. Second thing is this. If you look at it, how does Daniel pray? In fact, this could be really good for you, because when you pray, and how are you going to pray? How are you going to pray? Daniel prays 2 things, continually, and Daniel prays relationally. Continually and relationally. For the most part, if you don't pray relationally, you're not going to pray continually. And the fact that he prayed 3 times a day meant that this was part of Daniel's normal routine. This is what sustained him. This is what kept him going, was this relationship to God. In fact, it reminds me, I just think there's this correlation. If you look at when Jesus teaches, when he teaches the Lord's Prayer, and when you see Jesus' first temptations where he hadn't eaten for 40 days, and the enemy comes and says, well, just turn the stones into bread. Everyone would understand. You hadn't eaten in 40 days. And Jesus said, yeah, I can't do that because you don't really live on bread alone. He says, how do you live? You live by what? Every word that comes from the mouth of God. You know what that means? Relationally. That's what you live by. You don't live by what you eat. You live by the relationship that you have, what you trust in and what you put your hope in. And even when Jesus, teaches us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. It means we understand we have to eat regularly. You can't stop eating, unless you don't want to be around, right? It's just a part of who we are. I remember when I was a kid, I thought eating is such a burden. You ever think that? No, of course not. Not now, but I did as a kid. I thought, this is just God. How could you design a system where we have to eat all the time, It's just, it just takes away my playtime. And me going and doing, as a little kid, you think that way, Mom and Dad say, you have to stop and eat. Messing me up, And I just thought, wow. Well, I don't think that way anymore. I've learned, no, it's a good thing. In fact, it's a wonderful thing to have that time. Meal times are a special time of relationship with other people. And it reflects on the fact that mealtime is a time that you stop and that you're nourished in your relationship with God. This is so important because, listen, if your only nourishment, if your only part of your relationship with God is showing up to church once a week or, twice a month or whatever, you're probably going to be malnourished. You're probably going to be lacking relationally. And when you lack relationally, it takes away from God's Spirit living inside of you and God's character being built inside of you and the sense that you get that this is where I find what I need. This is what makes me strong. And you know what it does? It lowers in the world as you function and as you live and as you work, it lowers your neediness in the world, that I need all these other things to fill me up or to make me happy or to sustain me or long term to say I have a future. So Daniel prayed continually and he prayed relationally. Second thing is, you notice back in that passage, Daniel gave thanks. First thing he did, he'd go and he'd give thanks. What is he doing? In his time of going and praying, he's looking to God and saying, God, thank you that you made me. Thank you that you watched after me. Thank you that when I was carried away from Jerusalem to Babylon, you didn't desert me. You've always been there for me. You've always, Daniel could have looked at it and says, God, you deserted me. How did I end up here in Babylon? The opposite was true for Daniel. Daniel just looked at it and says, no, the opposite. God has sustained me. God is with me. God has become my strength here even much more than he was in Jerusalem, where I had everything I wanted or could do whatever I wanted to do. Here, he's become even more of a strength. And I think that Daniel, just like, Adam and Eve would walk around, talk about his day with God, everything that he'd gone through. God was his counselor. God was his adoration. God was his sustainer. And then it makes sense, as it says later in that same paragraph, he then asked for guidance and help. That's what he went when he prayed. He said, God, show me what to do. Help me. I'm sure that Daniel actually talked with God about every decision he was making. I need to be wise here. I bet when Daniel, because I'm sure that he had them, when Daniel felt like, man, I've got to rush, I've got to make the decision right now, I'm being pressured, the throng is there upon me, just like it was on King Darius, that Daniel is feeling like, man, it was God that slowed him down. And God that said, hey, Daniel, have I ever deserted you? Have I ever led you in the wrong direction? I know that everyone else is panicked around you. You don't have to panic. I'll be with you. Now, Daniel, because if you look at his job, Daniel wasn't a procrastinator. Daniel did his job. Daniel was good at his job. But whenever that fear came over Daniel, or that sense of, man, I'm behind and the train is about to run over me and back over me, it was God that became his sustainer through all of those things and made him so attractive to King Darius. Look at the next verse. This is what it says in verse 13. Then they told the king, that man Daniel, when you're referred to as that man, you're probably in trouble, right? That man Daniel, it gets worse, one of the captives from Judah. So he doesn't describe him. He's 80-something years old. Since 15, he has worked and served in Babylon, but he's referred to as that guy that was taken, captive, from Judah. So they are trying to lower the bar. He is ignoring you and your law. So they've taken Daniel's actions of being faithful to God and say, it's not about faithfulness to God. This is just a guy who shows no respect for you. He doesn't care what you think or what you say. They're trying to twist the evidence in this way. And he says in the next sentence, he still prays to his God 3 times a day. We know. We went by his house. Hearing this, the king was deeply trouble. Now, this is different than last week with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where Nebuchadnezzar was deeply troubled when they didn't do what he wanted. In this case, it's the very opposite. He says, deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. That's how much respect he had for him. And how much he is realizing now, man, I was duped. I was tricked into something. I fell for the throng coming and overwhelming me and pushing me into a quick situation. These guys are not trustworthy. They are looking after themselves, and they have manipulated me into eliminating the one guy that I could always count on. He spent the rest of the day looking for a way to get Daniel out of this predicament. Verse 15, in the evening, the men went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. So at last, the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to him, listen to this, may your God, whom you serve so faithfully, do what? You know where King Darius is? You know where he's at? I don't want Daniel to be eliminated. Daniel's the most faithful guy I've got. I trust him, and I have nothing else to look to except who? Same one that Daniel looks to, the God of heaven. Because I've got myself in this mess. My own neediness has caused me to sign something that I thought inflated me, and all it's going to do is hurt me because I'm going to lose the one guy that I can count on and that I can trust in. It says in verse 17, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seal of his nobles, so that no one could rescue Daniel. No person. Then the king returned to his palace, and he spent the night fasting. This is not the kind of fast when someone says, I'm going to discipline myself in fasting. He didn't feel like eating. He is so upset. Everything has turned upside down so quickly, he doesn't want to eat. He refuses his usual entertainment, and he couldn't sleep at all last night. And somebody did a song like that at one point. Last night. Okay, verse number 5. Daniel's enemies are actually in this, they don't realize it, they're actually singing Daniel's praises. They're actually saying that Daniel is a guy that only trusts in God. They're setting themselves up because of who Daniel follows and who Daniel serves. And they don't even know that that's exactly what's being set up, and it's been set up with the king. And then number 6, King Darius is on Daniel's side now more than he's ever been. It has worked the opposite of the way these guys thought it was going to work. They thought, we're finally going to show King Darius, you don't want some stranger, some foreigner running things. You can't trust him. And actually the opposite is true. King Darius is more trusting of Daniel now than he has ever been before. And he's more distrusting of these guys than he's ever been before. And then it says this in verse number 19. Very early the next morning, the king got up. He hurried out to the lion's den. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, long live the king. May God, my God, sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not harm me. For I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. And the next verse says, and the king was overjoyed, and he ordered Daniel to be lifted from the den, from the lion's den. Not a scratch was found on him. Say this part with me. For he had done what? He had trusted in his God. He trusted in his God. And if you read the end of it, the last, it's not in your outline, but if you read it in there, then King Darius begins to sing the praises, make proclamation about Daniel, yes, but before that, long proclamations about the living God that Daniel serves, who he is, and why he is so faithful. See, this becomes the point of Daniel's life, that through Daniel's life, other people would see how real the living God is. That's Daniel's life. Daniel's life is not trying to lift up Daniel. Daniel's life is not trying to make a big deal out of Daniel, trying to, leave a monument to Daniel so that everybody would remember Daniel. Daniel's life is about the faithfulness of God to his life. This is what King Darius sees. This is what he proclaims. Why is Daniel able to do this? Because Daniel has his needs met by the same living God. He doesn't need the world to do it. He doesn't need the cultures of the world or the kings of the world to do this. In John chapter number 6, kind of interesting. Jesus is starting his ministry, and it kind of pops out. They realize who Jesus is, and the people recognize, man, this guy really could be our rescuer, our Savior. He could be the guy that changes everything. And it says, it's a strange thing, because you would think, Jesus, here's your chance. I'm sure that's what the disciples thought. Here's your chance. They want to make you king. They want to make you ruler. Jump on it. And it says that Jesus withdrew. He hid himself and went away because he knew what was in their heart, and he did not need them to make him king. That wasn't why he came. That wasn't his plan or his purpose. And he did not need them to make him king. God doesn't need me to make him king. He is king. I really fulfill no need of God, but God fulfills my need. God gives me what I am lacking. And when I acknowledge that, when I act upon that, what people get a chance to see is not me, it's who? God. It's the same thing with you. But God sets you up by putting his finger on your neediness, by a lot of times taking you to a place where everything you thought you wanted, you hoped would happen, you prayed that God would give you, all of those things don't happen, so that you would find your needs being met, your neediness being met in God himself, and other people could see the same thing. Let's pray this morning. And I know even in saying this that it touches on some painful things for some of us. The one thing I can assure you is whatever your pain is, it's not that you're the only one. Whatever your struggle is, it's not that you're the only one who struggles. Whatever your neediness is, listen, you're not the first one. We are all needy. We all struggle with looking in the wrong places for the wrong things, including the God of the month, to fix us, to sustain us, to fill that void that's inside of us. And Daniel's story is, it can only be filled by one, only by God himself. This is why Jesus Christ came into the world, so that you would know that it is his full intention to make us whole and healthy by our relationship with him. And Jesus gave his life on the cross so that you could have that relationship, so that you would know that God has not cast you away or forgotten about you or decided he doesn't care. The opposite is true. God loves you with a love that caused his own son to give up his life for you, so that you could know him, so that you could be made whole inside, so that he would become your strength and your trust, and daily he would become the relationship that sustains you, and he would become a new focus for who you are in everything that you do, in every endeavor that God takes you through. What a great time to put your trust or to renew your hope Jesus Christ, as we pray in his name.